like we funded the A round, so people are operating on a set of assumptions. They don't have very many facts. And it's good to know what your top 5 or 6 assumptions are. And I remember when my company was acquired, I was really nervous about going to the first board meeting because it was a New York Stock Exchange public company, and I asked, what do I need to be prepared for this big company? And so I had this big thing prepared, and the CEO, who was a former GE executive, and GE operates on this basis, basically said to me, are the assumptions that you've articulated for the business that you told me when I was visiting you in Minneapolis still true? And I said yes, and he goes, all of them? And I said yes, and he goes, well, then you're done with your report. So, you know, it's easy to get stuck in a reality distortion field where you just keep flailing at it. So it's a great thing that you did to acknowledge, hey, one of my assumptions that did not exist was this competitor. Mm-hmm. So a more complicated version of creating an assumption set is reading Michael Porter's competitive advantage, which has the value chain in, which is a little dense, but if you compress that down to what are my top assumptions about my competitors, you know, about the market, about my pricing, about the technical capabilities I need, and you just put those on a whiteboard somewhere, and one of them turns out to be false. I just want to repeat one thing that Chris said earlier about these assumptions, that a pivot doesn't mean you have facts. It means you built a new set of assumptions. So even though you've learned something, you still have to have your set of assumptions. But in your two things combined, that there are a lot of companies that, you know, unbelievably companies can get started without capital. Mm-hmm. I've done it before myself. It does force you to perform some unnatural acts because you have to be slightly penny-wise and pound foolish. And one of those unnatural acts tends to be contracts you wouldn't normally take if you didn't have to, or consulting agreements, or building one-offs, where you bring money in and you think you're always going to get ahead. And I'm going to get more money this next time, which will allow me to do more natural acts. Yes. And, you know, sometimes that works. But most of the time it doesn't. And it may not take much money. It sounds like you haven't raised a lot of money to get, you know, going into more of your business, where you're trying to figure out, how do I land some revenue so that it creates a multiplier effect? So I get both revenue and growth at the same time. Pricing strategies are really, really hard. And what we look at with our companies is, how do we land with maybe a small amount of revenue? First of all, how do we get in the door? We call that infiltrate our customer. Then how do we land, meaning someone writes a check, so we know that there's some wallets there. And how does that landing yield a multiplier effect? And some companies try to jump faster, and they can. Workday is a classic example where they raised a ton of money, and they said, we're not even going to sell you our product unless you're willing to pay $1 million. And there was a couple reasons. One is they wanted to take a big chunk out of Oracle right away and say to Oracle, you know, screw you, we're here.
Those were personal reasons.
Those were personal reasons. They were personal reasons related to PeopleSoft. But they had to raise over $100 million to do that. Now, if Workday didn't do that, they would have found a way to come in through maybe the talent management piece, which Oracle didn't have at the time before they acquired a company, you know, get a smaller amount of revenue for that, then full fan out. So looking for some sort of multiplier effect, look for, how do you get the company to pay attention to you? How do you then get someone's wallet in that company to pay attention? And how does that small change you get on step one have some way to expand after you've landed in your customer? And then you get growth. So build the multiplier effect in your business plan from day one. One thing that I will say is, sometimes it's impossible to find these, you know, sort of really great go-to-market strategies and predictive selling and multiplier models. Then $1's $1. Then you're just going to have to go out and get revenue. We don't like when that happens at our companies, but sometimes it does. It's like, go find revenue. That usually does not mean we have a great success. It means, you know, let's keep you in business, you know, and on the market map. however we can. But if that happens, it's not pretty.
I don't know.
I think that, Silicon Valley has a very high concentration of investors that are funding things that originally were, silicon and semiconductor, and now there are like 70% software, no matter how you look at it, not even medical devices anymore. So here is not where you can find those investors unless they're, moving to a more philanthropic part of their life and they're doing this independently. Around the country, you'll find different investors that aren't, because they don't have the concentration of engineers and engineering management and, sort of the concentration of similar talent that we have here. So, this may just be an issue for Silicon Valley and the investors here. Now, that being said, you've got about $29 billion last year that was invested in the U.S. by U.S. venture capitalists. 50% of it never left the state of California, and most of it stayed here. And if you add in New York and Boston, you've got 80% of the venture capital, and the rest was sprinkled around. But there are specialized investors in these areas of sustainability and other areas that are just not here, and they're unlikely to be here. The problem then is unless there's a concentration or set of investors to do the first round, the second round, the third round, either in your focus area or your geography, you've also got an issue. So these investors that focus in these areas also are in a different set of investors, some that I mentioned to you earlier,
right.
But they're not here.